I just watched Barbarian and I have to talk about this film. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is this is a film where you want to know as little as possible going in, and you may have heard that from other people. Believe it, it's one of those films you want to see completely blind. Now, I like to watch my films blind anyway nowadays, especially horror films. Don't like watching trailers. They show too much, they ruin too much. It's much more fun and enjoyable to watch a film not knowing what's coming. Now, Barbarian is a film that capitalizes on that idea perfectly. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk about the film in a very basic form. I'm not even going to tell you what it's about. I'm going to be completely spoiler free. I'm going to tell you what I liked about it in very vague terms, and then what I'm going to do is give you a moment to come off the video, go and watch the film, and then once you've watched the film you can come back and watch the second half of this video where I'm going to go into some spoilers. So I'll give you a warning when I'm going to go into spoilers, but let me talk about why I like this film in the vaguest way possible without actually telling you what it's about. This film is one of those rare films that comes around maybe once every few years, which really has you on edge, really captivates you, and really has you not knowing where it's gonna go. It was a thrilling cinema experience, one that had me on the edge of my seat. It had me completely captivated, transfixed to the screen, had my heart racing, and I just couldn't tell which direction and which path this film was going to go down at any given moment. And it's so rare for a film to do that, and I was mighty impressed by this film and how it was executed. I thought the direction, the editing, the performances and the cinematography were all excellent. The performances from the main three cast members in particular. Some of the casting is completely genius. So you've got Bill Skarsgård cast as a character in this film. His scenes purposely have an automatic sense of unease due to Bill Skarsgård being Bill Skarsgård, and that's why it's genius casting, because it immediately makes you suspicious of his intentions, and the film keeps you guessing for a very long time on which side of his morality is he on, where his morality lies. Is he good? Is he bad? Is he contributing to negative things in this film, or is he actually a good guy? You don't actually know for so long in this film, and that in itself builds so much suspense throughout the film. And it's expertly done, and it's a really good piece of casting, some of the best casting that I've seen this year. When the film wants to capitalize on the suspense, it does it incredibly well. There's some very claustrophobic sequences in this film that ratchet up the tension and your heart rate really easily, and the scenes really take their time to build the suspense and then let it extend right out before it gives you your kind of release. And sometimes that release is a scare or a moment of horror. Sometimes the release comes in the form of some realistic type of comedy. The beginning of this film, and I'm being very vague, but the beginning of this film, the opening, the first act of this film, so the opening 30 to 40 minutes of this film is perfect in my opinion. Pure perfection. For multiple reasons, and in my opinion it could serve as its own short film in its own right. It's that great. But what it does is it very quickly establishes the situation to set up the film, and it immediately intrigues you with that setup, and then it continues to build on that setup for the next 40 minutes. And I don't want to say it's slow paced, but it's very methodical with what it's doing. So although it's not slow paced or by no means boring, it does take its time in a methodical way to lay the groundwork, and in amongst it you won't realize it necessarily as you're watching the film, but come the end of it you'll realize in amongst that scene it's laying the groundwork for the themes that the film is actually exploring. I won't even go into detail on what those themes are because I want you to experience it when you see the film, but it's laying the groundwork very smartly for that as well. But this very intriguing situation that it sets up, really good. The actors play off each other really well, and the suspense is slowly building from the very beginning, and it builds and it builds and it builds to a tremendously well executed crescendo around 40 minutes in. But then what happens after that is the film takes a sharp turn tonally and in terms of where the focus of it is, into something completely different. And it's a very intentionally jarring shift, which further emphasizes the fact that you just don't know where this film's going, and it puts you in a state of confusion off to the direction that this film's going in. But I loved how it did that. And this next act of the film starts off in a very comedic way, and the tone of it kind of shifts to comedy for a period of time. But I thought it really works as it establishes this character. But I highly recommend watching Barbarian. Now, if you're in America, it's released digitally, so you can download it or purchase it digitally, or still watch it in the cinemas. If you're in the UK, it's just come out in the UK cinemas. I highly recommend going to the cinema and watching this with a crowd. It's one of those films that's just very thrilling, but the experience itself is very fun and memorable, because the film will take you on a ride and you're not going to see where it's going to go. And that type of uncertainty surrounding where the film's going to go and the unpredictability of it makes it very fun and unique and memorable. So I highly recommend you go and watch Barbarian. Once you have watched it, or if you already have watched it, you can continue watching this video from this point on, because right now I'm going to talk spoilers now, so I can actually get into the details of why I enjoyed this film so much. So that is your spoiler warning. If you've seen Barbarian, you're free to continue watching. If you haven't seen it yet, go and watch the film. And I encourage you, if you think, oh no, I haven't seen it, but I don't really care, I'll just listen anyway and find out, I'll warn you, watch it first, because it's a great experience knowing nothing at all. Watch it first, then come back and listen to what I have to say now about the spoiler side of it. So let's talk about it. This film opens with, I forgot her name, but I think her name is Tess. A woman that's going to an Airbnb in Detroit, and she gets there, and there turns out to be a man there, played by Bill Skarsgård, who's already at the address. Now what's happened is they've essentially double booked this address. They're both supposed to be staying there that night, and they're in a bit of a predicament. So what happens is she ends up staying in the Airbnb with him. He says he's going to sleep on the couch. He's determined to allow her to comfortably sleep in the bed whilst he sleeps on the couch, so they can be separated respectfully, but so they can both have shelter under this roof, because he doesn't want her to be out in the dark on her own at night in this area, because as he describes it, it's a very dangerous area. You get a lot of tension in this opening setup, which I think was expertly done, and a lot of that tension just comes from the simple fact of having a woman in a house with a complete stranger that she doesn't know, and we don't know his intentions. Now what I said about the genius casting is Bill Skarsgård has a very unsettling demeanor about him. Now of course a lot of people will know him as Pennywise from the It movies, and if you're aware of that, that will add to it, that it's quite easy to look at him as the bad guy, or to at least question his motives. And naturally you'll do that, especially women as well, when dealing with a stranger that is a male. So right from the beginning of the film, you're starting to question what's really going on here. Why is this Airbnb double booked? Why are these two people in the same location at the same time? Is it purely by coincidence and an accident? Or is Bill Skarsgård's character manipulating the events to bring in this woman into this place so that he can be her for a different motive? Who knows? But as the film progresses on, we learn that she's got a job interview that she's there for the next morning. They kind of converse eventually, because he tries to put her at ease by making her a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, for example. She's very on guard and doesn't want to drink that, understandably so. The same thing occurs with some wine. Eventually she does cave in, and they have some glass of wine, and they bond through talking about her work. And there's an aspect to him that relates to her work that they kind of have a conversation about. So everything's at ease. Then we get to this nighttime scene where he's asleep, and her door opens up in the middle of the night, and when she looks up, she can see him in a state of distress, sleeping, making noises as if he's having nightmares. She goes to approach him whilst he's asleep and wakes him up, which startles him, and he's very defensive, and questioning her for touching him and how weird that is, which it is. But the whole time you're kind of expecting something negative from his side of the fence, so you're still questioning and up in the air of what's going on. As the film progresses, she ends up in the basement, locked in the basement, and discovers a secret passageway. She goes down that secret passageway and she finds a little room with a bed, there's blood on the wall, and a camera. Doesn't look very good. She tries to escape. She eventually gets out of that basement through his help, and she's in a very panicked state, trying to describe what's down in the basement to him, and that she wants to leave. He doesn't want her to leave because he wants to see it for himself first. Now, at this time, you're still questioning whether it's genuine or not. Does he genuinely not know what's downstairs in the basement, or is he completely aware of it because this is his whole setup? You don't know, and this is one of the aspects of the opening 40 minutes that really works really well in this film, and it's a credit to the casting once again, as I've said many times before. Bill Skarsgård really has you on both sides of the fence for the whole opening 40 minutes, because you just don't know. You're uncertain. You don't know whether to trust him or not, and it works for the suspense of the film really well. But we get him going down into the basement. He said he'll only be 30 seconds. He goes down there. He doesn't come back. So she goes to investigate. Finds a secret passage beyond the first secret passage, which leads down this very dark and narrow corridor. Bear in mind, all these scenes in this tunnel are very claustrophobic and well shot. She hears him crying out for help, so she investigates further. She eventually finds him, and he's now very panicked, very panicked, wanting to escape. And he's essentially saying to her, there is someone down here. There is someone down here. Come this way. She's trying to go back the way they just came to exit. He wants her to go the opposite way because he said someone bit him. Someone's down here. It's a very panicked scene and anxiety-inducing scene, and you get a great reveal of some very tall, kind of older-looking, decrepit woman coming out the shadows, grabbing his head and slamming it into the wall multiple times, killing him. Cut to black. That's your opening. And I thought that whole movie, from the beginning of the film up until that exact moment, is pure perfection, because the film explores the themes, which I'll get into in a moment. It introduces the themes that it wants to explore, as well as introducing these two characters, as well as starting to build the suspense between the interactions between these two characters in a very realistic way, by having a man and a woman who are both strangers being under the same roof and no one really knowing what the real motives are of the other person. Then we introduce this tunnel, which builds intrigue, and then those scenes within the tunnel and how tense and suspenseful they are, and it all builds up, and all that paranoia, to this big reveal, unexpected reveal of this woman under this house in these tunnels who attacks the man. Cut to black. Fantastic opening. Then we cut to another character played by Justin Long, who's driving a car, taking a phone call. Seems to be an actor. He's got a pilot, and he's just been told he's about to be fired because he's about to get hit with accusations of sexual assault. And all of a sudden the tone of the film is completely shifted. We're focused on a completely different character we haven't seen before, and it's very jarring. But at that exact moment, it drew me in even more, because I'm like, what's going on here? How does this fit into what was going on before? And that drew me in even more, made me even more intrigued with what was going on. And I thought it was very well done. And his character brings in a lot of comedy into the film. There's a whole comedic element to his character that felt very natural, very real, and very ironic in a way as well, especially with how he handles this news of his career coming crashing down because of the sexual assault case. Very well handled in general, but Justin Long brought a lot of humour to the role that felt very natural, very funny, and it suited the new tone that the film shifted into. But what we learn is essentially he, quote unquote, owns the house that the events of the first act happened in. So he goes back there looking to sell that house so he can recoup some money to pay for his legal fees. But once he gets there, he starts to see evidence of someone that was staying, who clearly hasn't left. Eventually he ends up in the basement searching for them. And once again, we get more suspenseful scenes, and we get a reveal, more details on the woman that's in the house, with this videotape she's watching of a woman breastfeeding a child, and things of that. Some very weird stuff occur. He ends up getting chased and falls into a trap. In that trap is the woman from the beginning of the film, from Act 1. And the film then goes down, I'm not going to explain the rest of the film in its entirety, but the film then goes down this path of, you start to realize that this woman in the house is infatuated with the humans she's captured as if they are children, and she's trying to baby them. And it's very strange, very, very strange. And then we get another hard cut to a flashback scene with this older gentleman who comes out of the same house that we've been in for the whole film, but obviously decades before. And it shows him go shopping, grocery shopping, and then it shows him follow a woman from the supermarket to her house. And it's essentially implied that he captured the woman and brought her back to his house. And then we cut away back to the present time. Now, the key theme of this film, I believe, is centered around abuse, the abuse of women by men. And that's kind of laid out with this flashback scene of this older gentleman, but also it links into that earlier conversation, I believe, with Bill Skarsgård's character and Tess, because they discuss that dynamic. And as an audience member, you automatically tap into that just from watching the scenario, the uncertainty, because you have a woman in a vulnerable position with a stranger who's a man in a house. And that type of scenario kind of plays into the theme of abuse and the power that a man has over a woman in particular situations, and how that can be exploited. And I do believe that's the core theme of this film, because what we eventually learn is that man still lives down in the basement as well. He's very old, and what he's essentially done is recorded video footage, and that's what the camera and the bed was in that other room. He's recorded video footage, and he has tapes of him assaulting, raping, whatever, other women that he's picked up off the street, and there's loads of tapes, so he's done it to loads of women. We get a homeless guy, is he homeless? I think he's homeless, that we see later on in the film, who ironically was actually chasing the woman and used for a scare earlier on, who we thought was a threat, but he actually wasn't a threat. He was just trying to warn her not to go back in the house. But he gives us information that essentially the man's birthed children out of the women he's kidnapped, and then continued to breed with them, and that's how it's ended up with the people that we see, or the woman that we see in the house now. So she's a result of all the abuse that's gone on over the decades, and it kind of changes your perspective on that old creepy woman character, because all of a sudden now you kind of feel a little bit of empathy for her, because she's the one that's been mistreated, as is all the women by this man in the house. So it really just changed the perspective on the film, or on that character anyway, that creepy character. But what I will say is, in terms of the film itself, what really impressed me was it kept me guessing, it kept me on my toes, it kept me on the edge of my seat. It was thrilling. I definitely found it very suspenseful at times. It had a few good jump scenes that startled me, that were really well crafted, and I thought that the cinematography and the direction felt very fresh and inventive. The way, whether it be transitions, it could be scene transitions. There's a really cool day to night scene transition where the camera pulls back on the bed and you see the woman laying there and it cuts. There's a few POV shots inside these very narrow claustrophobic tunnels that are really effective. There's loads of different, variety of shooting techniques. Even for the flashback, the camera's raised up a lot higher. And you get this kind of elongated looking frame that just warps the image to make it look very different compared to the rest of the film. It's very bright and colourful, like it's the 50s or 60s. The street that they're on looks like a complete movie set, and I think it's supposed to look very much like a movie set to give you this kind of surreal feeling, whereas the actual street in the modern timeline is just a very rundown area of Detroit where all the other houses are decrepit and abandoned, and there's just this one house in the middle. But I thought that, yeah, the editing as well, the editing mixed in with that cinematography and direction goes hand in hand to create a really excellent and invigorating and exciting experience with this film. And I thought the performances just really added to that. The main three performances from the woman, who I can't remember her name, Bill Skarsgård and Justin Long. I thought they all did a great job, and they all had their specific part to play in this story, in this film, and the experience as a whole. Another ironic aspect I found with the themes of the film is I believe that Justin Long's character parallels with the older gentleman we see in the past who ended up doing all of this stuff, because the older gentleman kidnapped the women and raped them, whereas Justin Long's character is being punished and held accountable for raping a woman and assaulting a woman. And the way that they handle his situation coming to light is almost in the typical Me Too movement fashion, where an actor gets exposed, a Hollywood Reporter write an article on it, and he has to deal with being dropped by everyone. And I feel like the film uses him to highlight a modern method of abuse that men utilize. And that's something that we see today and that we have seen today, especially with the Me Too movement and how that stuff gets exposed. And then the older gentleman is showcasing an older way, an older method, one that still will be used by some men in this modern day, but a much more older method that people used to assault and rape women, which was actually kidnapping them and, holding them in captivity and raping them, etc. So I think there is a parallel between those two characters in terms of the themes of the film, and I thought that enriched the film more, because as you were watching Justin Long's character for the first time, you do kind of think to yourself, what has this got to do with what the first 40 minutes was about? But it does come together, I believe, in a fairly good way. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Barbarian, but I thoroughly enjoyed this film. It's one of my favourite films of the year, one of my favourite cinema experiences of the year. It's always exciting to me when a new horror film comes out that provides just a very fresh experience that just feels different. It's an experience I'll remember for a long time, especially because of how the film threw me for a loop 40 minutes in, because I just didn't know it at any point really where the film was going to go. And it reminded me of Hereditary, because when I watched Hereditary for the first time, I thought I knew what the film was and where it would go. Then when the girl dies in Hereditary, it suddenly threw me into the unknown, because I suddenly didn't know where the film was going to go. And that's what this film does, especially 40 minutes in. And I really appreciate it for that. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. If you're a horror fan, I actually think it's a must-see. You should watch this. And if you've watched this far, I'm going to assume that you have seen it by now. If you have, drop a comment in the comment section and let me know what you thought about it, because I'm very intrigued to see what people think. And I'll catch you guys very soon.